1 year after my grandparents passed away, I thought going back to their house would finally give me closure. I kept telling myself it was just paperwork, just memories, just one last look before I moved on. I was driving there, replaying my grandmother's voice in my head when my phone rang. I almost ignored it. The voice on the other end wasn't crying. It was worse. Calm, tight, controlled. "Emily, you need to come now," the man said. "What we found changes everything." I asked him what he meant. He didn't answer. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking so badly I had to set the phone down. My chest felt heavy, like my body already knew something my mind wasn't ready to hear. When I finally reached the house, the air felt different. The door was open, people were waiting, and as I stepped inside, my heart nearly stopped, because whatever they'd found wasn't just about my grandparents, it was about my family. The house stood exactly where it always had, tucked behind a line of old maple trees, quiet in a way that felt almost intentional. My grandparents' house had never been grand, but to me it had always felt solid, safe, like nothing bad could ever happen inside those walls. I parked the car and just sat there for a moment, staring at the front porch. The paint was peeling now. One step sagged slightly in the middle. I remembered my grandfather promising every summer that he'd fix it next weekend. He never did, and somehow that made it feel more real. I hadn't been back since the funeral after they passed. First my grandfather, then my grandmother. 6 months later. Everyone said the same things. They lived a full life. At least they're together again. Time heals. What no one said was how strange it feels to return to a place that once held laughter, knowing the people who created it are gone. As I stepped out of the car, the smell hit me immediately. Old wood, damp leaves, and the faint scent of lavender my grandmother used to keep in small cloth bags around the house. I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how tight my throat felt. Growing up, this house had been my escape. Every summer, my parents would drop my sister Lily and me off here for weeks at a time. No schedules, no pressure, just long afternoons, my grandmother humming in the kitchen, my grandfather reading in his chair, pretending not to watch us while secretly keeping track of every move we made. He used to say, "As long as you're under this roof, you're safe." I believed him. Inside, the house felt frozen in time. The furniture hadn't moved. The clock above the fireplace was still stopped at 2:17, the moment no one bothered to reset after the power outage last winter. A thin layer of dust coated everything, softening the edges of the room like a filter over an old photograph. That's when I noticed I wasn't alone. A man stood near the hallway, holding a folder tight against his chest. He looked up quickly when he saw me, as if he'd been waiting. "Emily," he said, nodding. "I'm Mark. I was hired to inspect the property." So this was the voice from the phone call. Behind him, 2 other people stood quietly, one near the back door, another halfway up the stairs. They all wore the same expression, uncomfortable, alert, like people who knew something they weren't sure how to say. I tried to smile, but it didn't sit right on my face. "You said you found something that couldn't wait?" Mark hesitated. "I think it's better if I show you," he replied. That was the first time my chest tightened again. As we walked through the house, memories followed me from room to room. The scratch on the wall where Lily and I once tried to measure our height with a pencil, the faded rug my grandmother refused to replace because it had been a wedding gift, the small desk in the corner where she used to sort papers late into the night. My grandmother was always organized, careful, methodical. She trusted rules, she trusted systems, and most of all, she trusted family. That thought stayed with me as Mark stopped in front of a closed door near the back of the house. I frowned. "That door was never locked," I said quietly. Mark exchanged a look with the others. "It is now," he said. Something about that sent a chill through me. I suddenly thought of my parents, how eager they'd been to handle everything after the funerals, how quickly they'd told Lily and me not to worry about the estate, the paperwork, the details. "We'll take care of it. You girls have been through enough." At the time, I'd been grateful. Standing there now, staring at that door,
I wasn't so sure anymore. Mark reached for the handle, then paused. "There's something else you should know," he said carefully. "What we found doesn't just affect the house." I looked at him. "Then what does it affect?" He met my eyes, his voice low. "Your family." And in that moment, I realized that whatever waited behind that door wasn't just a discovery. It was the beginning of something that would force me to question everything I thought I knew about the people who raised me. Mark opened the door slowly, like he was afraid of what might happen if he moved too fast. The room beyond it wasn't large. It used to be my grandparents' old storage room, boxes of photo albums, holiday decorations, and things no one ever really throws away. But now it didn't look like a storage room at all. The shelves were cleared, the boxes were gone. Instead, a narrow table was pushed against the wall, a portable lamp clamped to its edge, and a small stack of folders laid out with careful precision. Everything was too clean, too intentional. "This wasn't here before," I said, more to myself than to anyone else. Mark nodded. "We found it yesterday when we started checking the back rooms. Someone had installed a new lock, not recently, but not years ago either." I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing softly against the floor. The air felt stale, like the room hadn't been opened in a long time. My eyes went straight to the folders. They were labeled with dates, account numbers, names. I recognized some of them, neighbors my grandparents had known for years, people who used to drop by with pies or stop to chat on the porch. Others meant nothing to me at all. "What is this?" I asked. He hesitated again, and that hesitation was starting to scare me more than any answer could. "We're not entirely sure, but based on what we've seen so far, these aren't personal documents, they're financial." That made my stomach twist. My grandmother had handled paperwork for friends, occasionally helping them understand forms, explaining things in plain language. She was careful about it, almost obsessive. She used to say, "If it's not documented properly, it doesn't exist." I reached for one of the folders, then stopped. "Am I allowed to look at these?" I asked. "You own the property. Legally, yes, but I think you should be prepared." "Prepared for what?" I opened the first folder. Inside were photocopies of bank statements, letters addressed to people I barely remembered, and handwritten notes in my grandmother's neat, familiar script. But something was wrong with them. Small inconsistencies, numbers that didn't align, transfers that didn't make sense. And then I saw a name that made my chest tighten. Lily Carter. My sister's name was written in the margin of one page, underlined twice. I flipped to the next document. Her name appeared again. "Why is my sister's name on this?" I asked, my voice sharper now. Mark glanced over my shoulder. "That's one of the reasons we called you." I felt suddenly dizzy. Lily had never been involved in anything like this. She struggled just to keep her own life together, teaching during the day, waiting tables at night, barely scraping by. She hated paperwork, hated banks, hated anything to do with money. "This has to be a mistake," I said quickly. She couldn't." "We don't think she did anything gently," Mark interrupted, "but her name appears on multiple documents, as a reference, sometimes as a contact, in a few places as an authorization." The word hit me hard. Authorization. I closed the folder, my hands shaking. "No," I whispered. "That doesn't make any sense." That's when another detail surfaced in my mind, something I hadn't thought about in years. A conversation Lily and I had late one night after her divorce. She'd mentioned getting strange letters from banks she didn't recognize, requests for confirmation, accounts she swore she'd never opened. She'd laughed it off. "Probably a scam," she'd said. "I just threw them away." I told her she was probably right.
Now, standing in my grandparents' house, that memory didn't feel harmless anymore. I looked around the room again, suddenly aware of how deliberate everything was. The lock, the labels, the careful organization. Someone hadn't just hidden these documents, they'd been managing them. "Who else has been here?" I asked quietly. Mark's jaw tightened. "Your parents stopped by a few times after the funerals. They said they were sorting things out for you and your sister." My pulse started pounding in my ears.
I remembered how quickly my mother had insisted Lily and I not worry about the estate, how my father had told us it was too complicated and that they'd already spoken to professionals. "Trust us," he'd said. "We're just trying to help." At the time, I believed him. Now, as I stared at my sister's name written over and over on documents she'd never seen, a different feeling crept in, slow, heavy, and impossible to ignore. Fear. Because if Lily hadn't put her name there, someone else had, and whoever that was had done it from inside our family. I don't remember sitting down, but suddenly I was on the edge of my grandmother's old armchair, the folder resting on my knees like it weighed 100 pounds. Mark watched me carefully. "There's something else," he said. "We weren't sure when to bring it up." My heart sank. "There's more?" He nodded and reached into his bag, pulling out a thin envelope. It was yellowed at the edges, the paper soft with age. I recognized the handwriting instantly. My grandmother's. My breath caught in my throat. "Where did you find that?" "Behind a loose panel in the hallway closet," Mark said. "It was taped to the inside, like she didn't want it discovered by accident." The envelope was addressed simply, "Emily." No last name, no date. My hands trembled as I took it. My grandmother had always been precise with words, careful with intentions. If she'd hidden this, it meant something. I hesitated. "What if I'm not supposed to read it yet?" I asked. Mark didn't answer. He didn't need to. I broke the seal. The letter inside was 3 pages long, written in her familiar neat script, though the lines wavered slightly toward the end. She must have written it when her health was already failing. "My dear Emily, if you're reading this, it means I didn't have the chance to explain things myself." My vision blurred. She wrote about the house first, how she wanted Lily and me to have it, how she trusted us to do what was right with it. Then the tone shifted. "There are things happening that I don't fully understand yet," she wrote, "but I know enough to be afraid." My fingers tightened around the paper. She explained that she'd noticed irregularities in documents she'd helped review for friends, small discrepancies at first, transfers that didn't match what she remembered discussing, names appearing where they shouldn't. "What frightens me most," she wrote, "is Lily's name appears in places I know she never authorized." I sucked in a sharp breath. She went on to say she'd confronted someone about it, someone she trusted deeply. The letter didn't name them, but the implication hung heavy between the lines. "I was told not to worry, that I was confused, that my illness was making me see patterns where none existed." My jaw clenched. That was my grandmother, strong-willed, sharp, and yet in her final months people had questioned her clarity instead of listening. "If I'm right," she wrote, "Lily could be hurt. Not physically, but in ways that follow you for years. Reputations, records, legal consequences." The room felt suddenly too small. She apologized for not acting sooner, for hesitating, for hoping the truth would reveal itself without tearing the family apart. "I wanted to protect everyone," she wrote, "but silence is not protection, it's just delay." By the time I reached the end of the letter, my hands were shaking so badly I had to press them flat against my legs. Mark cleared his throat softly. There was something else with the letter. He handed me a small piece of folded paper. Inside were login details, a website, a password. "What is this?" I asked. "We checked," he said. "It leads to a private online folder. We didn't open it. We thought that should be your decision." I stared at the paper. A private folder, hidden, secured, planned. My grandmother hadn't just suspected something, she'd been preparing. A wave of anger rose in my chest, slow, burning, unfamiliar. Not at her, at myself. I thought of every time my parents had told us everything was handled, every time they'd said Lily didn't need to stress about paperwork, every time they'd insisted they were acting in our best interest. I stood abruptly. "I need to see what's in that folder," I said. "Right now." Mark nodded. "There's internet here. Weak, but it works." As I pulled my laptop from my bag, one thought echoed in my mind, louder than the rest.
If my grandmother went to this much effort to hide the truth, then whoever she was afraid of was someone she saw every day, someone who smiled at family dinners, someone who thought no one would ever look too closely, and I was about to find out exactly how wrong they were. The internet took longer than usual to connect, the small loading icon spinning like it was mocking my impatience. I sat at my grandmother's old desk, the same one where she used to organize receipts and write birthday cards weeks in advance. The login worked on the first try. A plain screen appeared, no photos, no labels meant to comfort, just a list of folders with dates stretching back several years. This was intentional, I muttered. She didn't want this found easily. Mark stood a few steps behind me, silent. I clicked the first folder. Inside were scanned documents, bank statements, authorization forms, letters sent to people I barely remembered. Some of them were elderly neighbors, others were names I recognized only from holiday conversations or church gatherings. What tied them together was the same pattern: money moving in directions it shouldn't, accounts opened without clear explanations, signatures that looked close but not right. And then there it was again, Lily Carter. Her name appeared not just once, but repeatedly, sometimes as a secondary contact, sometimes as a temporary holder. In 2 files, she was listed as having approved transfers I knew she'd never seen. No, this isn't possible. I scrolled faster, my chest tightening with every click. There were emails saved as screenshots, messages between my grandmother and someone else, someone whose replies were careful, polished, and infuriatingly calm. "You're overthinking this. Everything is legal. Lily agreed to help. She just doesn't remember." My hands curled into fists. She would remember, I said out loud. She would never forget something like this. Mark leaned closer. "There's more." I opened the next folder and nearly dropped the laptop. Audio files, short recordings, some only several seconds, others several minutes, all labeled with dates. My grandmother's voice filled the room as I clicked the first one. Weaker than I remembered, but unmistakably hers. "I'm asking again," she said softly. "Why is Lily's name on these documents?" A man responded. His voice was smooth, familiar, too familiar. "You're tired, Margaret. You're mixing things up."
My stomach turned. That voice belonged to my father. I felt like the floor had shifted beneath me. In the recordings, he never raised his voice. He didn't need to. He dismissed concerns gently, reframed questions, suggested confusion without ever directly accusing her of being unwell. "You trusted me with this," he said in one clip. "Let me handle it." Another recording followed weeks later. "I don't want Lily dragged into this," my grandmother said. "If something happens, nothing is going to happen," my father interrupted, "and if it does, I'll take responsibility." The lie sat heavy in the air. I shut the laptop abruptly, my breathing uneven. "This goes back years," I said, "while Lily was struggling, while she was divorcing, while she was barely keeping her life together." Mark nodded slowly. "It explains why her credit history started collapsing around the same time." The words hit me harder than anything else. Lily's missed opportunities, the jobs she didn't get, the loans she was denied, the shame she carried, believing she had somehow failed on her own. It hadn't been bad luck, it had been engineered. I pressed my palms against the desk, fighting the urge to cry. "She has no idea," I said. "She thinks she ruined her own life." "What do you want to do?" Mark asked quietly. The question felt enormous, because now this wasn't just about documents or money or even my grandmother's fears. It was about my sister, about the fact that someone had used her name, her identity, and her silence as a shield. I opened my phone and stared at Lily's contact for a long moment. If I called her now, I would change everything. If I didn't, I'd be complicit in the same silence my grandmother had regretted. I finally exhaled and stood up. "I'm not calling her yet. Not until I understand all of this. Not until I can protect her." Mark studied me, then nodded. "That's wise." I picked up the envelope with my grandmother's letter and held it tightly. She had tried to shield Lily until the very end. I wasn't going to let that protection turn into a trap. Whatever came next, whatever it cost, I was done pretending this was just a family matter, because what I was looking at now wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a plan, and someone in my family believed they would never be caught. I didn't plan to confront them that night. I told myself I would wait, gather everything, speak to a lawyer, protect Lily before she even knew she needed protection. But plans have a way of falling apart when fear turns into anger. My phone buzzed as I was packing the documents back into my bag. Mom. I stared at her name on the screen, my heart pounding so loudly it felt like Mark could hear it. I answered. Emily, she said too quickly. Where are you? At Grandma's house, I replied. There was a pause, a small one, but I heard it. You shouldn't be there alone. Your father and I were going to stop by tomorrow. There's no need to dig through old things. It's all handled. That word again. Handled. I already saw them, I said quietly. Saw what? My father's voice cut in, suddenly, on speaker. I closed my eyes. The files, the recordings, Grandma's letter. The silence on the other end stretched long enough to make my stomach twist. You've misunderstood, my father said at last, his tone calm, practiced. Your grandmother was confused toward the end. You know that.
No, I snapped. She was scared, and she was right. Another pause. This one heavier. Emily, my mother said softly, you're tired. You've been emotional since they passed. Let us come get you. I'm not leaving, I said. Not until we talk. All of us. I heard my father exhale slowly. Fine, he said, if that's what you want. An hour later, they pulled into the driveway. Lily came with them. She stepped inside, smiling, confused, her jacket still half-zipped. Hey, she said lightly, what's going on? Mom said there was some kind of mix-up. My chest tightened. Lily, I said, standing up. We need to talk. She looked between me and our parents, her smile fading. Why do you look like that? My father spoke first. Emily's been digging through things she doesn't understand, he said, and now she's upset. I turned to him. Don't. He raised an eyebrow. Don't what? Don't talk over me, I said, my voice shaking but firm. Not tonight. Lily frowned. Emily, what's he talking about? I took a breath and pulled the folder from my bag. Lily, I said gently, have you ever authorized financial documents using your name for Grandma's friends? She laughed once sharply. What? No, of course not. I slid a page toward her. Her laughter stopped. That's my name, she said slowly, but that's not my signature. My mother stood up. This is inappropriate, she said. You're upsetting her. She deserves to know, I replied. Lily flipped through the pages, her hands starting to tremble. These accounts, Emily, these dates, she whispered. This was when my credit collapsed, when the bank refused my loan. My father crossed his arms. This is being blown out of proportion. I turned the laptop toward them and pressed play. My grandmother's voice filled the room. I'm asking again, why is Lily's name on these documents? My father's recorded voice followed. You're mixing things up. Lily looked at him stunned. Dad. He didn't look at her. You recorded Grandma? My mother demanded, horrified. She did, because she didn't feel safe. That did it. My father's calm cracked. Enough, he snapped. You have no idea how complicated this was. I was trying to protect this family. By using Lily, I shot back, by letting her life fall apart. Lily stood up suddenly, tears streaming down her face. You let me think I was a failure. You watched me blame myself. My mother whispered. We didn't think it would go this far. Lily turned to her slowly. You knew.
My mother couldn't answer. The truth settled like a weight in the room. My father finally looked at Lily. It was temporary, he said. I was going to fix it. When? After I lost everything? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. If you report this, it will destroy the family. I moved between them instinctively. No, I said. What destroyed this family was the lie. Lily wiped her face, her voice suddenly steady. You don't get to threaten me anymore. That was the moment everything shifted. Fear left her eyes, and I knew we had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed.
I picked up my phone. I've already spoken to a lawyer, I said, and tomorrow we're taking this to the authorities. My father stared at me, disbelief flashing across his face. You wouldn't. I already did, I replied. For the first time that night, he looked afraid, and for the first time in years, Lily looked free. The next morning came too quickly. None of us slept. Lily sat at the kitchen table wrapped in one of Grandma's old cardigans, staring at nothing. Her eyes were swollen, but there was something new in them now. Clarity, painful but steady. I drove her to Daniel Moore's office just after 9. Daniel had been my grandparents' attorney for years. Careful, quiet, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. He didn't interrupt once as Lily explained everything. Not when she talked about the strange letters from banks, not when she described her credit collapsing, not even when she admitted how many nights she'd cried, convinced she was the problem. When she finished, Daniel folded his hands on the desk. Lily, he said gently, you didn't do anything wrong. She let out a shaky breath. What happened to you, he continued, fits a pattern of identity misuse and financial manipulation. The fact that it came from inside your family doesn't change the law. My father shifted in his seat across the room. He hadn't spoken since we arrived. This doesn't need to go further, he said finally. We can resolve this privately. Daniel turned to him, expression neutral. That option passed the moment forged documents and recorded evidence entered the picture. My mother's face went pale. Daniel explained the process slowly, what could happen, what protections Lily had, what steps we could take to prevent further damage, credit freezes, affidavits, formal reports. This is about stopping the harm, not punishment for its own sake. Lily nodded, gripping my hand under the table. Later that afternoon, we sat in a small, quiet room at the local police station. The officer assigned to the case, James Walker, spoke calmly, never rushing her. You're not in trouble, he told Lily. You're the one who was harmed. Those words broke something open in her. She cried then, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the kind of relief that comes from finally being believed. I watched my parents from across the room. My father avoided looking at us. My mother kept wringing her hands, whispering that she never thought it would end like this. But it wasn't about how it ended for them. It was about how it began for Lily. By evening, paperwork was filed, accounts were flagged, investigations formally opened. As we walked out of the station, Lily paused on the steps. I was so scared of what would happen if I told the truth, she said softly. I squeezed her hand. So was Grandma, I replied. That's why she made sure we could finish what she started. For the first time since this began, Lily straightened her shoulders. I don't feel weak anymore. Neither did I, because once the truth was spoken and protected by the law, it stopped being a weapon and started becoming a way forward. The weeks after everything came out were harder than the confrontation itself. When the noise stopped, no shouting, no accusations, no urgent phone calls, what remained was the quiet, and the quiet was unforgiving. Lily stayed with me longer than either of us expected. At first, it was practical. She didn't feel safe being alone. Neither did I, if I was honest. But soon it became something else, a kind of unspoken agreement that we didn't want to face the aftermath separately. Some nights, she barely slept. I'd wake up to the sound of her pacing the living room, wrapping and unwrapping her arms around herself like she was trying to hold something together from the inside.
I keep thinking I missed something, she admitted one night, sitting on the floor with her back against the couch. I sat beside her. You trusted the people who raised you, I said. She nodded slowly, but the guilt didn't disappear that easily. During the day, life turned into forms, phone calls, and waiting for credit agencies to respond, waiting for confirmations, waiting to see if the damage could actually be undone.
Daniel checked in often, explaining each step carefully, reminding Lily again and again that the law was on her side, that what had happened to her had a name, that it wasn't a personal failure. Still, every small update felt enormous. The first time a fraudulent account was officially removed from her record, Lily stared at the email for a long time before handing me her phone. "So this is real?" she asked. "They believe me?" "Yes," I said softly. "They do." She covered her mouth and cried, not from fear this time, but from relief. Our parents didn't take the distance well. At first, the messages were angry, then pleading, then defensive. "We were trying to protect you. You don't understand how complicated it was. Families don't do this to each other." Lily listened to every voicemail once, only once. After that, she deleted them without opening them. "I spent years explaining myself to people who weren't listening," she said. "I'm done doing that." We set boundaries that felt brutal but necessary. No unannounced visits, no emotional negotiations, no rewriting what had already been proven. It wasn't about punishment, it was about survival. The house became the final task hanging over us. Sorting through it was strange, now less painful, more deliberate. We worked room by room, deciding what mattered and what didn't. Some things surprised us. We kept my grandmother's handwritten recipes, even though neither of us really cooked like she did. We kept the chipped mug my grandfather always used, the one he insisted tasted better than any other, and we kept the cardigan Lily wore almost every day now, even in summer. Letting go of the rest didn't feel like loss. It felt like breathing. When the sale finally closed, Lily stood in the empty doorway longer than I expected. I thought she might cry. Instead, she exhaled slowly. "I used to think this place was the only proof that we were loved," she said. "But it wasn't the house." I waited. "It was what Grandma tried to do for us," she continued, "even at the end." That realization changed something in her. In the months that followed, Lily started standing taller, speaking more confidently, laughing, really laughing, without immediately apologizing for it. She found a new job, not glamorous, not perfect, but honest, built on a clean slate that belonged to her. One evening, as we washed dishes together, she glanced at me and said, "I don't feel broken anymore." I smiled, because you never were. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came in quiet moments, in boundaries held, in truth spoken without fear. And for the first time since this began, the future didn't feel like something we had to brace ourselves against. It felt like something we were allowed to step into. People like to say that time heals everything. I don't think that's true. Time doesn't heal lies. Time doesn't fix damage done in silence. Time just gives you space to decide what you're willing to carry forward and what you're finally ready to put down. For Lily and me, healing didn't come from pretending things were normal again. It came from accepting that some relationships don't survive the truth, and that losing them doesn't mean we failed. It means we chose honesty over comfort. The investigation continued quietly in the background. Lawyers handled what we no longer needed to touch. The law did what it was designed to do: protect the person who was harmed, separate responsibility from blame, and make sure the truth couldn't be buried again. What mattered more was what happened outside of courtrooms. Lily rebuilt her life with a patience I deeply admire. She stopped apologizing for taking space. She stopped explaining herself to people who had already decided not to listen. I changed too. I learned that being loyal doesn't mean staying silent, that love isn't proven by endurance of harm, and that protecting someone, even when it's hard, is an act of courage, not betrayal. We still visit our grandparents' graves together. We bring flowers. We talk to them like they're listening. In a way, I think they are.
My grandmother once wrote that silence isn't protection, it's just delay. She was right.
Family isn't defined by blood alone. It's defined by who tells the truth when it's uncomfortable, by who stands between you and harm, by who chooses your safety over their own pride. Lily and I didn't lose our family that year. We finally understood what one really looks like. And for the first time, that understanding feels like peace.